The book we are summarizing today is called What Do You Say? How to Talk with Kids to Build Motivation, Stress Tolerance, and a Happy Home. The authors are Dr. Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson. These are the same authors as those who wrote The Self-Driven Child, which is the book that I presented in December 2024. And this was the book that got the most votes when I gave a survey. And thank you to all of you who completed the survey and voted. There's a few people, Betsy, you're actually one of them, who won one of the books, and we need to get the book out to you. Check your email. And did you get that email?
Yeah, I did, and I think I
Okay.
sent in my selection, so
I think you did. And then my VA was saying, like, we might need your phone number to send it. But I'm like, just put my phone number. I think that's if Amazon can't deliver the package. They want to be able to call you. But I'm like, it
that
doesn't
makes
matter.
sense.
They'll be able to get it to you, I'm sure. So it's on the way.
Okay,
Um,
thanks.
so this is what no, you'll see it in a second. It'll slide anyway. But I liked this book. I liked the Self-Driven Child book as well. This one, though, for those of you who really enjoy examples, this book has a ton of examples. I would say actually the majority of the book is examples of conversations that you can have and examples of conversations that went one way and how they would recommend it could have gone a better way, which is very useful, but not that conducive to the book club summary because I don't want to just be like reading out these conversations. So I'll be just highlighting what the general gist is and talking about how important that is. It's one thing to know what we should be doing. And I think most of us do know what we should be doing. The bigger question is, how do we get ourselves to be able to do that in the moment when we, as parents who love our kids, are having strong emotions when things aren't going the way that we would like? So I'll be talking about that too. So let me share my notes here. It should be that one. Okay. So again, let me just thumbs up if you guys are seeing now the slide primarily. I think you're seeing this whole window, so maybe I just want to close these things and then just double check that this is working here. It seems like it is. Okay. So hopefully you can see this. If you can't, hop back in and let me know. So again, this is the book, and I wanted to share this again. So for those of you who are just joining the Empowered Parent Book Summary Club, I've renamed it because some people were letting me know, oh, I keep meaning to go, but they were feeling ashamed that they hadn't read the books. And the whole point of this book club is not that you read the books, it's that I read the books, summarize them, and then you can decide whether it's something you want to fully read or you can just take away the highlights. So there is a public Facebook group that you can search. It's called the Empowered Parent Club, and then you can request membership there. I will request that you got on my list before you're in here. So first, if you don't mind, go to theparentdoctor.com/book club and sign up for the book club. That way you're going to get all the replays emailed to you and notifications about the book club each month. There's also an app. It's called The Parent Doctor. At this time, you can just get it in the Apple Play Store, I guess it's called. Google is a little trickier. We're still working on getting it there. But all of the book club replays are in this app for free. So if you want to catch up on the 12 books that I presented last year, you can watch any of those. And it's nice because you can watch them offline. So if you were going to be, I don't know, taking a cross country road trip or on a flight or have some downtime where you may not have Wi-Fi, you can actually download that summary and listen to it and watch it there. Okay, there we go. I also have a podcast. It's called, very creatively, the Parent Doctor Podcast. I'm in season 2, where I've been interviewing lots of people, although the episode I just put out this week is really a very personal story. It's my origin story. It's a story about my relationship with my father. And the episode before that, though, I interviewed my friend, Dr. Jennifer Uzor, who's a pediatrician in Florida. And we discussed something that I think would be of interest to a lot of you, and that is how mental health screening happens for kids. Because in most states, starting around age 12, 13, kids have protected privacy rights to be able to consult with medical providers or therapists about mental health care, substance use, and sexual health. And that puts on us as physicians who care for children a duty really to screen for mental health. What this looks like, though, can vary a lot. And so there was a book called Bad Therapy, which I summarized in my podcast with another episode talking to a fellow child psychiatrist named Dr. Shavana Naidu. This book was basically an outrage by a journalist who felt that her 12-year-old who went into the pediatrician for belly pain should not have been asked questions about being suicidal. So Jennifer Uzor and I really discussed the good, the bad, and the ugly about pediatric screening tools and how they can be done well and how they can be done not so well, and what we as parents can do to really make sure that we're communicating with the pediatricians, nurse practitioners, other providers who see our kids to make sure that we're in agreement with the way our kids are being screened and that we're included in the conversation. So that episode was released last week. But if you don't mind, please go ahead and take a listen. And if you can rate it, that will help it get seen by more people too. So, just in terms of, hi, Lindsay, just in terms of this book, Understanding the Landscape and why it's important, I've talked about this a lot, but this is why I created the Parent Doctor as a platform. I'm super passionate about educating parents and supporting all of you to be the best possible connected parents to your children. Why? Because we are facing a mental health crisis. Our kids are. And I've seen this firsthand as a child psychiatrist over the last decade, especially. There's just rising rates of depression and anxiety in kids, including in kids who have it all, in kids who are in affluent areas and going to excellent schools where you would think that they should have it all and be good, but actually they're at increased risk for suicidality, depression, eating disorders, and substance use. So suicide is now the second leading cause of death for kids between the ages of 10 and 24. And this really highlights the need for emotional support. Children often feel overwhelmed by external pressures and lack of control in their lives. And this is the point that Bill Stixrud and Ned Johnson really drive home in their books, which is that we as parents want to convey to our kids more autonomy and more control. How do we do that? We really have to be comfortable sitting back and letting them increasingly have decision-making ability and autonomy. And that's easier said than done because we have to be able to do that with our whole hearts, really with love and not with judgment or inducing shame or I told you so when they mess up, because we should expect that they will mess up. They are younger than us, they have less life experience, they're not going to always get it right. But if we can give them those experiences to have agency, we really reduce their risk of mental health problems. So there is hope, though. I don't want you to feel hopeless hearing these statistics. One of the quotes that I loved most in this book, and I know this to be true, a strong connection to a parent is the silver bullet for preventing mental health problems in kids. Now, this is not to say that if you have a child who has mental health struggles, that you are failing them. That's not the case. It's just to say that there is a lot we can do. And I don't want any of us to feel hopeless because there's so much that we can do. And this book walks us through a lot of those good things. So they talk first about connection. And there are four sort of pillars to building connection with our kids. The first is individual time. Not all time with our kids is equal. Sometimes we feel like we're spending lots of time with our kids, but maybe we're shuttling them to different activities, sitting there on our phones while they're doing the activity, but we may not be actually connecting with them that much. So they emphasize that we want to have one-on-one time, creating a safe space for open communication. And this kind of harkens back to a book that I presented last year called The Family Board Meeting. And this book really recommends that 4 times a year, about every 3 months or so, you have half a day, 4 hours with each of your children, where it's just you and your child one-on-one. You let your child dictate how you're going to spend that time. You don't have your phone with you, so you're not interruptible. You're completely dedicated to them and present with them. And you just see how it unfolds. So go back and watch that one. If you've never done that with your child, I highly recommend that you try it out. You're going to learn things about yourself and your kid in the experience. Each time I do it, I learn more things. And it's become now, after it's been a year now that I've been doing that with my kids, it's a really nice tradition. Now, for those of you who have multiple children, like I know someone who has 4 kids, and they're like, that's a lot of hours, like 4 hours with 4 kids, that's a lot of hours. So it's okay if you can't do 4 hours at a time. Just find even 15 minutes a day to play a game one-on-one with your kid and put your phone away and put the TV off and just really be present with them. So it doesn't have to be a 4 hour chunk of time, but it's just important to be mindful of the fact that even if you're spending time with your child, is it quality time? It may not be, right? Then the second is proximity. So again, this is related to spending time, but it's really being present, right? So if you can't attend all of your kids' games or all of their theater performances, that's okay. Ask them which one they would like you to attend. And then when you do go, make sure that you're really attending to it, that you're not on your phone, missing their goal or something like that, and really give your full attention. And shared interests. So this one has been something that has changed my behavior in the last few years. I don't really play video games. I didn't grow up playing them. I suck at video games. But my son He's a digital native and he's been playing video games for years and he really enjoys it. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing. I don't think he plays way too much, but I have started playing with him because I know that sharing interest in something that he loves is going to be good for our connection. And they specifically talk in the book about video games because that's often a point of tension between parents and kids because parents feel the kids are playing too much or they don't like that the kid is playing the video games and it becomes this battle. But if you can sit down and play with your child, be curious about it, understand what it is that they love about it, you're going to be able to have much more sway in being able to communicate with them and get them to have autonomy about deciding how much is too much. And then finally, it's family rituals. So small things like meal times, bedtime stories, all of those promote closeness and reduce stress. So none of this is really surprising, but I do think they are things that we can unintentionally allow to not happen, like individual one-on-one time. I know it's easy to feel like you spend a ton of time with your kids. For example, here in Los Angeles this week, we've been facing the fires, evacuations. I've been with my kids for basically a month straight. They went to school one day in the last month. They're not going back till next Monday. I've spent a lot of time around them, but the quality time that I've actually spent with them isn't actually that much. And in fact, sometimes when we're around our kids all the time under these kinds of circumstances, like the pandemic, like working from home, like what's been going on in LA, we can actually be more stressed. And therefore, the amount of actual quality time, one on one time, eye contact time that we have with them may be less because we're internally preoccupied. All right. So then, still in chapter 1, they talk about the importance of empathy. Empathy basically doesn't mean that you're sorry for someone, but just that you're letting them know, I understand and hear this is how you're feeling. This requires emotional regulation on our part as parents, which is easier said than done. In order to validate another person's feelings, we have to not be logical. We have to be okay with the mirror neurons that get activated in us, the distress that we feel, and being in that uncomfortable place with them without trying to solve anything, which is easier said than done because none of us want our survival brain to be triggered. And when our kids, whom we love so much, are in distress, it triggers our survival brain and therefore makes us want to fix it or tell them it's fine or get over it. So we really have to fight those instincts. Um, once we do, once we can be calm and just hear what they're saying, then we can engage in reflective listening. So this involves paraphrasing and validating the feelings. We reviewed this as well back in Stephen Covey's book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Families last year. If you remember in that book, if you were here, we talked about the 5 levels of listening that Stephen Covey has. I love his way of thinking about this, but level 4 and level 5 listening were the 2 levels of listening that contribute to connection, that basically make deposits in the joint emotional bank account that you have with another person, whether it's your child or a friend or a work colleague. Level 4 listening means you really reflect back what you hear they're saying. And you're like, what I got, WIG, this acronym here, I like this, wigging. So it basically means what I'm hearing is this, or what I got from your statement is this, or this is what I think you're saying. Is that right? So you're really seeking to understand what it is that they're saying. That's reflective listening at level 4. Level 5 is seeking not just to understand what they're saying, but to understand the emotion they are feeling that's driving them to say that. So that's really what we're going for when we're talking to our kids and trying to exhibit empathy. We want to avoid dismissiveness. Again, as parents who are older and wiser, who can see things in a broader perspective than our children can, it's easy to be dismissive of their intense feelings. How do we do that? The best thing you can do is be curious. They recommend asking how, not why, but how. So, how does that affect you? How does that make you feel? How did that impact you? Or how did you handle that? Like basically, avoiding dismissiveness by being curious is a really good tool. You can't be dismissive if you're curious, as long as you're genuine about your curiosity and your body language and tone of voice are conveying that genuineness. And then they talk about discipline with empathy. When we do have to set limits with our kids, if we can do that rooted in empathy, and they give some good examples in the book. One of them was in the later chapters when they're talking about screen use, drug use, teenagers, scary stuff. And these parents were really in a tough place with their daughter who had apparently thrown a party And this had happened before, but then they were out and a neighbor called that she's throwing another party. By the time they got home, it was all cleaned up. And they told their daughter, the neighbor called and told us you were throwing a party. And she denied that it had happened. And so they knew that she was lying and they decided to cool off. And then the father went to her and he's, look, I think you're lying. I think you know that we think you're lying, but I've decided I'm giving you amnesty. All right. So whatever happened, it didn't happen. I'm over it. And he just forgave her for something without demanding that she own up to it. And that discipline, which was actually no discipline at all, but just like giving her amnesty, then opened the door for her to come to them and admit that she had thrown this party. And that was the first time they'd had an honest conversation with each other in months. It's a good example of how basically sometimes with kids, it's really tricky. And the thing that works may not be the thing that your survival brain is telling you really need to be doing to make sure your kid will be okay. So here's some examples that I did want to include because I thought they were good ones about what not to say, because conveying empathy is really important to developing a good connection with our kids. So we don't want to try to talk our children out of their feelings. And this goes for our partners too, right? If you're married, you don't want to say, don't be mad about that, or get over it, or it's not too cold to play outside. I'm guilty of this. I've definitely done this with my kids. But your kids' feelings are their feelings and they're never wrong. And if you think about it for yourself, if you're feeling something, can anyone ever talk us out of our feelings? No, right? We can't be rationally talked out of our feelings. So we have to first reflect and understand what that is. The second is saying to our child, oh, you're just tired, you're just hungry, you're just crabby, why are you so irritable? Pointing out that a person is irritable is never helpful. And I thought it was cute. The author says, even though I know this with my wife who gets really hangry, I'm still working on trying not to tell her, you're just irritable because you haven't eaten lunch. So it's easy again to slip into these habits, but the more that we can be aware of them, the more we can rate them. Using the question again is not helpful because it induces shame, right? It makes our child feel like they have failed us, failed themselves. If we say, oh, that happened to me once too, that can be helpful, but it's not helpful in the short term. If our child is really emoting and coming to us about something that they're seeking our understanding about, that kind of shuts the door. They call it like grabbing the wheel or something like that. Like basically, we want to give them space to have this feeling, and we don't want to make our experience from the past outshine their current experience. Then they talk about using questions that aren't really questions. So saying like, why didn't you hand in that assignment? That's not really a question, right? It's more of an accusation with a question mark at the end of it. They talk about dismissive positivity. I'm definitely guilty about this too. Saying to our kids, don't worry, it's going to be okay. Basically, that's ultimately invalidating, right? It's not being with the emotion that they're having in that moment. And then final one is I'm going to call your principal and talk to her. So this is basically sympathy, not empathy. It's problem solving for your child. And that's not what we should be doing. We really want to just be with them with their feelings and then ultimately empower them to come up with a solution and support them in seeking that solution. Okay, non-anxious presence. I love this idea. So they talk about Mr. Rogers being the example of a non-anxious presence. This is a calm presence. Let me find my notes about this. Calm and courage, positive interactions and words, and modeling courage and reducing stress contagion. So I think as a kid watching Mr. Rogers, that guy, he was always just really even keeled. I wish I could be like that. I don't think I'm that even keeled. I don't know if I'll ever be that even keeled, honestly, unless I were heavily medicated, but he's really even keeled. The other person I love from like pop culture and things is the Grandma Tala in the movie Moana. I think she's another example of non-anxious presence. The whole idea here is that we really want to be the rock in our kids' lives who sees them as positive, who sees them as someone with potential, who sees them as someone who deserves respect and who is capable. That's what a non-anxious presence really is. So if we lose our cool and we're panicking and we're trying to tell our kids, like, why did you do that? Why didn't you do this? Don't you care about your life? We are not a non-anxious presence. We are not conveying to them that we believe in them and that we know there's many ways to have a good and fulfilling life and that they will figure it out somehow. And you can see that by holding onto that non-anxious presence, if you can be that for your child, of course, it's going to make it easier for them to navigate adolescence, to navigate the competitive college application process, and to know that I may not have the linear path that I envisioned, but I can still achieve whatever I want to achieve so long as I don't give up and I keep working hard, which is the truth, right? Positive interactions. This is something we've also talked about last year. The Gottmans are a couple who've done a lot of research. They're psychologists on couples and what makes couples work in marriages. But the research applies also to all relationships, including parent child relationships. And we really want to be striving, ideally, for 5 positive interactions to 1 negative interaction with our kids. And again, a lot of us grew up in households where the role of the parent was to correct, to scold, to nag. And we think that's our job too. But really, we can teach our kids and guide our kids and discipline our kids without scolding or nagging. We can build them up and shape them and model them by letting them know what we like in them. That works actually more effectively than telling them what not to do and what we don't like. Finally, down here, and this is really the part that's so important, but also so difficult, that is empowerment. When we think about what our ultimate goal is for our kids once they become adults and they leave our homes and they go out into the world, it's that, for me at least, that I am sure for you too, like I want them to be able to handle the stuff that life throws at them. I want them to feel confident that they can set boundaries with other people, set boundaries with themselves, set boundaries with technology, and have a balanced life that leads to fulfillment and friendships and success. To do that, though, I have to be willing to increasingly, as they grow up, step back and let them make their own decisions. And they talk about this in the book that even really young kids, they talked about this in Self Driven Child as well, generally can make pretty good decisions. There are some exceptions, though. They talk about if your child is significantly depressed or if there is any significant substance use, either of those conditions, psychosis, I would add too, any of those conditions are going to make it very hard for your child to be able to display to you that they can weigh different options. If they can't weigh different options, then they are going to need your help to make a decision. But if they can weigh different options and they make a decision that is not the one you would choose, these authors and I too really suggest that you let them make the choice that they make. So maybe they choose to stay at public school when you really would like them to go to the private school they got accepted to, or vice versa. Let them make the choice for themselves and let them live with the consequences, support them and love them, and know that it's going to be okay and they're going to learn something from it. When we try to impart our greater experience in a kind of authoritarian way and say, no, I'm making this decision for you, it leads to disruption in our connection, disruption in our trust, and ultimately it weakens their decision-making abilities and their ability to trust that they can handle things when things don't go their way. When we step back and we let them make that decision, it's probably not going to be perfect from there on out, right? And they're going to learn from that process, again, with our support at their back, that they can handle that when it happens, which is super important for them to experience before they're 18 and not only once they get out of our house. This relates also to Julie Lithcott-Haim's book, where she talked about all of the kids in college. If you remember, she's the dean from Stanford. She's written a couple great books, but a lot of people in academics, including Jonathan Haidt around 2014, started to see a shift in the young people who were coming in as college freshmen related to the onset of iPhone use and social media when they were teenagers. And they're really more fragile than the kids before them. And we really do need to, therefore, step back and let them build up some muscle about handling their decisions. I think it's more important for our kids now than it was even 10, 20 years ago. Any questions about that? All right. So the other part of this book that's really key, and this is what I would encourage you to take away from this, is they want us to be consultants. So our role as a parent is not to be the decision maker. It's not to be the problem solver. It's to be a consultant. And what does a consultant do? A consultant does not bring their own emotional baggage. The consultant is only interested in the success of their client, right? And whatever it's going to take that person to be successful. So they tell us, offer help. So if your child is struggling, you can let them know. If you need tutoring, if you need therapy, just let me know, but don't force them to go. offer to share your knowledge, but don't force them to listen to it. Just say, if you'd like to hear my experience, let me know. Encourage them to make their own decisions. Again, assuming they are not significantly impaired from depression or psychosis or substance use problems, assuming that they can weigh different options. Don't rescue them. And this is probably the hardest thing, right? Because when we see our kids making a choice that feels to us really like it's the wrong choice, it's very hard not to want to interfere and tell them, no, I won't let you do that, or I'm going to fix this for you. We really should just seek to understand what it is that they're going through, let them know that they can handle it. Again, be that non-anxious presence to let them know, I know that's really hard. I also know that you're a very capable person and that you're going to find a way to solve this problem and to get through this. And so that's very powerful to giving them the confidence that they need to navigate difficult situations, whether those are academic situations, interactions with teachers or people in authority positions, or situations with friends or situations they encounter online. All right. Then they talk about motivation, which is a whole loaded thing. There's whole books just about how do we get our kids to be motivated. And it's tough, right? Because I think people naturally exist on a spectrum in that some people are very motivated by wanting to impress other people, and some people are not at all motivated by wanting to impress other people. But there are things that individually motivate each of us. And those things are always intrinsic. So extrinsic motivators, like if you're going to give your kid $5 for every A on their report card, that will work in the short term, but they're very clear, and the psychology on this and the research on this is also very clear, that does never work in the long term. I can tell you this from having worked in some tough situations where the job conditions were just not ideal and we kept getting bonuses, but at some point you're just like, whatever, like no money in the world makes it worth this, right? Extrinsic motivation will only get you so far. Intrinsic motivation is really what we want to teach our kids to find for themselves. And again, I can't tell you and you can't tell your kids what's going to intrinsically motivate them. We are all wired differently. But I will tell you that kids from a very young age can understand this concept. I've been talking to my kids about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation since they were probably 5 or 6 years old. And intrinsic motivation outperforms extrinsic rewards for long-term success. The second point is self-determination. So again, this was emphasized in the last slide, but letting your kids make decisions for themselves really improves their motivation because they've got skin in the game. They've made a decision that they thought was in their best interest, that was going to be best for them, and they want to prove themselves right. Now, are they always going to prove themselves right? No. And our role as the non-anxious presence, the constant supportive force in their life, is to let them know that's okay. I'm proud of you for trying that. And now that's not really what you want to try. Maybe you're going to try something else next time. But that really helps them to have competence and autonomy. And we know that having autonomy and agency in your life really significantly reduces the stressors that are contributing significantly to teen depression and anxiety. And finally, empowerment. So again, respecting our kids' ability to make decisions even from a young age, and even if those decisions differ from our preferences. They say basically, as long as a reasonable person would not think that the choice that your child is making is insane, then you should let your kid decide what they want to decide. So that might include things, this came up last time. I think, Kara, you were asking us like about my kid wants to quit piano. Should I let them quit piano? I think you should let them quit piano, probably if they are consistently wanting to quit. But again, you can do that with a non-anxious presence. You can tell them why you value it, why you think it's important. You can do it as a trial, and you can just leave the door open for them and not make them feel that they've disappointed you or that you're really angry at them for their choice. Just let them know, okay, that's not what you want to do now. That's okay. The option will still be there in the future. These are tough things, though. Do any of you have examples from your own life about times when you had to let your kid or you did let your kid make a choice that wasn't what you wanted for them? And how did it go? You don't have to come on the call if you don't want to, but.
I do this every day with the outfits my kids want to wear. I'm like, are
Oh,
you
good.
really sure that's how you want to show up today? And they were like, yes, this is my look. And I'm like, go with God, like all by all
Mhm.
means.
Oh, I love it, Betsy. That's a great example. Actually, a recent podcast I did was with my friend Alex Chen. He has a 10-year-old daughter, and he gave the same example. My daughter is very like, we're not really she's not super academic and we're fine with that. Like they're doing all the right things. It's like she's a C student and she's okay with that. But she's also goes to the beat of her own drum and she goes to school wearing one hot pink sock and one green sock and this and that. And he's like, oh, I just wanted to make sure you're aware that you've got different colored socks because that's cool. But if someone says something to you, I want you to be like, yeah, I know, I like it. And that's what she does. So again, I think that's great. And if your child can own that, awesome. It helps them build their own confidence, their own sense of identity. Whereas if you force them to wear matching socks or to conform, and again, if you have sometimes you can't, right? Like your school has a uniform, you have to force them to conform. And then there's times when like you're going to do family portraits for the Christmas card or something that you're going to force them to conform. But in general, if you can let them have some autonomy, even in those little things, like choosing what they're going to wear, it goes a long way. Otherwise, you're going to be battling over every little thing, and the tension in your relationship can just build and build. And when that starts from a young age, I can tell you from the experience I've had seeing thousands of families, by the time they hit adolescence, it can become this very ingrained pattern that doesn't do anyone any good. So it's a tough line, though, right? Because you don't want to let them do anything necessarily, right? Like you want them to be safe, obviously. Yeah. Oh, and we're in an interesting time. Like styles have changed. So my 8-year-old likes to wear crop tops right now. And she looks cute, but I'm also like, am I like being too laissez-faire about things? I'm letting her wear the crop tops at home, but then when we go out, I make her put on a sweatshirt. And today she was asking about going to church because we've never taken her to church. And she was like, what do you wear to church? I'm like, you don't wear crop tops to church. You have to dress serious. So there's ways to have these conversations, but it is a bit of back and forth. And it does feel like a pretty fine line about some things. But I think it's a good example, Betsy, letting them choose what they can choose. Even at the dinner table, like instead of putting all the food on your kid's plate and telling them they have to clean their plate, which is how my parents did it, if you can put things kind of family style, let them help themselves to whatever they want and how much they want, that can help reduce a lot of battles and improve their sense of autonomy and agency too. Any other examples?
If the
Yeah.
book speaks at all about, is there any downside or benefit to sharing what your preference is, even if you give them the empowerment to choose? So, for example, like letting them choose what to eat and saying, I would recommend eating greens because it's really healthy for your body, but I'm going to let you choose. Or is
Yeah.
it bad to be like, I'm not sure that whole outfit matches. Like that to me is looking like it may not work together, but if you really feel strongly, go ahead. I don't know where to draw that line. I'm curious if he comments on that.
They do talk about that. I think in general, it's about saying, oh, I have some thoughts about that. Can I share them with you? It's about asking permission. I think if you say, can I give my opinion on that? And then they say, sure, then you go ahead. Or when you give the example of the food at dinner, you can say, I'm going to help myself to some greens because I know these are healthy. I think it's fine to say that out loud. And like a healthy plate, I've talked about this with my kids, is like half fruits and vegetables and then some protein, some grain. That's the ideal kind of layout of your plate. So saying those things in a generic way, I think is fine. Yeah, they talk a lot in the book of examples, but it's really about, can I tell you my story about this, my opinion about this, asking permission? Because again, that gets back to, where was that? This one, like offer to share your knowledge, right? Don't force it on them. But if say, yeah, that looks good. Can I tell you what I think might look even better on your plate? Or that outfit's interesting. Can I tell you what I think might make it look even better? Then you're asking permission. If they're like, no, I like it. And you're like, okay, cool, let it go. Because again, is it a really big deal whether they're matching or not and they go to school? No, it's not, right? It's one day. And they give the example that like your kids as they enter adolescence and they might have body odor. They're saying like the fourth grader who sits next to them or wrinkles their nose is more likely to make them change their behavior than you telling them and nagging them like you need to wear deodorant. So again, like your kid going to school with a outfit that totally doesn't work and having the natural and logical consequence of some peers being like, what are you wearing? Is much more likely to get them to not do that again because they're going to not want to. But if you nag them, they're less likely to believe it and to really own it themselves. So part of it is just having to let them experience painful life lessons and that those things do shape our behavior. I'm sure all of us have those painful life lesson memories from our own childhood and especially like junior high time. All right. So then chapter 5 is all about cultivating emotional resilience. And the emphasis here is that we build emotional resilience by experiencing and coping with stress, not by avoiding it. And so, again, the message here for us as parents is we don't want to rescue our kids and try to help them avoid any natural stressful situation, even something like being criticized by peers at school for the choice of clothing you made that day. Like, it can be tempting to be like, they're going to make fun of my kid or something's going to happen. Okay, whatever. Letting them experience that is a gift to them because that's how they're going to build emotional resilience. In the absence of this, kids grow up really fragile, like those kids that they were seeing between 2014 and 2017. If you remember all the talk, it was in the newspapers about like kids in college classes wanting trigger warnings because there was something about something that was distressing to them, an inability to cope. And we want to encourage our kids to embrace challenges and to see working hard and failing as an example that they are stretching their limits and getting stronger and growing. But all of this requires us supporting them. And again, having that non anxious presence behind watching them do things that are hard and conveying to them that, like, it's okay that you didn't succeed. I believe in you. I think you'll do better next time. What did you learn from this? All of that builds their emotional resilience. Whereas if we feed into their, you're not, if you don't do this, you're not going to get into this school, or if you don't do X, Y, and Z and get straight A's, then you're not going to be eligible for this. That's not a non anxious presence. That's not conveying a growth mindset. That's conveying like you have to be good enough, great, perfect in order to succeed in life, which is not true, right? And then chapter 6 is about reducing perfectionism and pressure. All of this is related to us, what this slide says, creating a safe base of unconditional love. So in the last book, they talked a lot about how it might work for your child's basketball coach to have kind of an authoritarian style. My ballet teacher growing up was very strict. That's fine for them, but the ideal way to be as a parent is to be firm and loving, to have unconditional love for your child. Basically, regardless of the outcomes of their efforts, regardless of the choices that they make, that you love them for who they are and that you believe in them. That's what we really want to be conveying. And then our well being is super, super important because we can only have that non anxious presence if we're taking care of ourselves first and foremost. So if we aren't doing a good job making sure that our own needs are met, both in all domains, like physically, emotionally, spiritually, in our careers, in our relationships, like we have to make sure that our cup is full first in order to be able to have a long fuse, have a non anxious presence when we are with our kids. And then finally, problem solving. Again, the unconditional love is about not solving the problem for them. And I'm definitely guilty of this. I get anxious when they're not doing something fast enough. Like, I think I convey my own history with my parents growing up needing to get it right, like to my kids sometimes. And I have to be aware of that. So being aware of what tends to trigger you to pop out of your non anxious presence and to want to just do it for them. Try to catch yourself a little bit earlier each time and try to even verbalize. They talk about this in the book. This is hard for me. I'm feeling like I want to jump in and do this for you, but I'm not going to. So I'm going to go in my room for a few minutes and calm down. So they talk about how high achieving environments often trigger perfectionism and anxiety in kids, that we can battle this. And we discussed this last year in the book Mindset by Carol Dweck, by encouraging effort and progress over outcomes and perfection, that we can avoid comparing our kids to their siblings or to other children. We don't want to set unrealistic expectations. Last month in the book club, I really showed that slide several times. It was like point A to point B, and realizing that everybody's on their same, everyone's on a different timeline, right? Some people are going to learn a skill and get from A to B very quickly. Others of us are going to get from A to B over a longer period of time. And then some people are never going to get to B. They're going to make progress, but they're never going to be up there. I could do gymnastics for 10,000 hours. I'm never going to be Simone Biles, right? And that's okay. So depending on what the outcome is that we're looking at, our kids may or may not achieve that, but with effort, they can definitely improve. And that's what we want to convey to them. It's up to them, though, to decide what their point B is and what they're going to work hard for. And that's where the intrinsic motivation can't be replaced by our external motivation. We have to really find out what is their internal drive to get to their point B. So it's tough, right? And especially with young kids, I think a lot of us as parents, we get anxious if our kid doesn't have a thing because when a kid has a thing, the kids who start playing golf at age 3, like Tiger Woods, or start doing gymnastics at age 4, like Simone Biles, or they start playing piano when they're really little, and then they're like at Carnegie Hall by the time they're 10, like those kids make us as parents feel like, oh man, am I doing something wrong? But the truth is that's extremely rare. It's rare that a child has a thing that they're so intrinsically motivated for at a very young age. It's much more common that kids try many different things and then get passionate about something sometime in their teen years or maybe even in young adulthood. And that's okay. That's totally okay. All right. So then, okay, this is the last slide. I'm going to talk a little bit about the last couple of chapters separately, but they had a whole chapter 7 on navigating technology and social media. And their take on it is basically that we need, especially as our kids get older, I think when your kids are young, to have strict limits on screen time makes sense. Although for most of us, especially with the pandemic, like that got more difficult, right? Because the schools were giving our kids devices, whether it be an iPad or a computer, and they had therefore a lot of time on those devices. So even if you were someone who said like you can just have your iPad for 30 minutes a day on weekends, like now you're screwed because the school is telling your kid they have to be on the iPad 6 hours a day. But what they do say, and this is what I've been taking as an approach with my kids too, is that again, wanting them to have their own intrinsically driven boundaries that they set for themselves. We don't necessarily want to just fight with them about how much screen time they get, how much video game time they get. Instead, we want them to be curious about it themselves and to see how much is enough. So they give a few examples. They give an example of a father who felt like his son was always on his phone. And they also gave examples that were interesting that some percentage, 60 or 70% of parents felt like their kids were on devices too much. But then when they asked the kids, it was a higher percentage, like 80% felt their parents were on their phones too much, which is pretty telling, right? And I think often we're unaware of how often we also are on our devices. And it's tough, right? In our modern world, most of us have jobs where it doesn't turn off when you go home at the end of the day, and responsibilities where we often have to be available and responsive outside of just traditional work hours. What does that mean? It means that our kids see us as present, but not really present. So that's really why that consciousness of the one-on-one time, the eye contact, having time where you're not on your phone is important. But the example that they gave was this father was feeling like his kid was on his phone way too much, but he didn't take a judgmental approach about it. He said, hey, what do you think is like the right amount of time? I was noticing and reading this article that you can use, they have all this phone, some of it's built into your phone, like how much screen time are you using? And so I don't know if it was video games or his phone, but it was like, how much do you think would be enough time? And the father proposed that they all track how much time they were using for the next week. And then they had their next family meeting. The son had said he thought 3 hours would be enough time. And he was surprised to see that he was actually on his phone way more than that. In fact, everyone in the family was. So they together implemented some rules about no screens at the dinner table, no screens after a certain time, screen-free time each day. And that together helped them to be more free from their technology. So again, like helping our kids to live in a world in which technology, they talk about this in the book, like alcohol can be an addiction, drugs can be an addiction, but you can live your life without alcohol, without drugs. Technology also can be an addiction. And about 10% of kids who do video games can become addicted to video games. That's a high number. But it's hard to live your life in 2025 and beyond without using computers, without using cell phones, right? So it's challenging. I think we really do have to teach our kids how to use this technology, to have them be aware that things like social media, they're really designed to hold our attention. They have psychologists like figuring out how to keep us scrolling over and over again. Like they are trying to keep our eyeballs on that device, on that app as much as possible. And so raising our kids' awareness to that so that they can be together with us in wanting to set boundaries and set limits for health is important. There's a lot in here also about sleep. I've talked about this a lot too. I've definitely seen this in my patients. Sleep is, I think, the number one thing that if we could make it better would have the biggest impact on our mental health as adults, but definitely on teens' mental health. A lot of kids are not getting the sleep that they need, and this leads to increased risk of depression and anxiety and so many other things. So there's a whole lot in this book about sleep. But again, when it comes to trying to get your kids to sleep, we don't want to take the nagging approach, the lecturing approach. We really want to be curious when they say that they're really tired or that they can't make it through their school day without falling asleep on their desk. to ask them, oh, why do you think that is, without judgment. And it's hard, right? It's so hard to honestly not have any judgment, but we really want to embody being on their side, being curious, and leading them to a possible solution rather than telling them how they can solve their problem. And then chapter 8 is about preparing kids for independence, all about gradually increasing kids' responsibilities to build their self confidence and their self reliance. This relates to giving them responsibilities at home, giving them responsibilities about their schoolwork. The last book, the biggest takeaway quote was, I love you too much to fight with you about homework. And I like that very much. So I take the approach with my kids that I do not fight with them about homework ever. And I've let their teachers know from the very beginning, anything about homework is between you and my child because it's going to be on them to do homework. I don't really have an interest in forcing them to do homework. If they're going to do it, it's going to be their intrinsic motivation. And if they get good grades, I want them to feel that's because of them, not because of me. And so far with my N of 2, it's worked really well. Would it work for every kid? I don't know. But you also want to teach them life skills like budgeting, cooking, time management, and then foster a sense of purpose and curiosity about the world to inspire independence. And so this goes along with, I remember one of the books we read last year was also encouraging us to bring our kids lots of different trials of things, expose them to some music, playing, listening, lessons, expose them to different sports, and then just see what's sticky to them. What are they intrinsically motivated to continue to do? Because again, most of us are not going to have a Tiger Woods, a Simone Biles. The more average thing is that your kid will be interested in something for a little while and then something else for a little while. And our job is not to tell them what to be interested in, but just to foster that interest and nurture that flame when it lights up and when it's there. So these are the key takeaways. I trust that you can take care of yourself and ask for help when needed. That kind of goes for everything. And it really encompasses this idea of stepping back and being the consultant rather than the director of your kid's life. And then knowing that our job as a parent is to help our kids figure out who they want to be and to support their journey, not to tell them who they need to be in order to be successful or in order to fulfill our dreams for them or our expectations for them. All right, that's it for this one. Our next book club is going to be The Gift of Failure by Jessica Lahey. This is one of the 4 pillars of empowered parenting that I teach. So those are emotional regulation, defining direction, embracing failure, and practicing gratitude. And this book is a really good one. So I'll look forward to presenting it to you guys the 3rd Wednesday in February. We should be back on track, hopefully, without any further huge natural disasters to our usual schedule. Any questions or comments about this book today, or urgent questions about your kiddos?
No, just wanted to say thank you. It takes a lot of bravery to give them the reins like that.
It really does. It
And
really
I
does.
think getting dressed is one thing, but you can go to the public school instead of the private school. Wow, that's really bold.
It's tough. Yeah. And I think it's also, I assume this goes without saying, but it's like that rope needs to get longer the older they get. And they talk in the book, and I thought this was pretty insightful, that the same things that make us good parents who are well attuned and with strong attachment to our kids when they're very young, like being there to solve every problem, respond to every cry, change every wet diaper quickly. Those are the things that work really well when our kids are really young and totally dependent on us. And then as they grow up, we have to do the reverse. We have to really let go, because they gave that example in the book that was Julia Lithcott-Hames. She gave the example of a mother cutting her kids' meat at the freshman orientation at college. If you go that far, you're still attending to every need that they have by the time they're 18 years old. You're totally impairing them. So sometime between 1 and 18, your kid should be changing their own clothes and wiping their own butts and cutting their own meat, right? But with those little decisions along the way, yeah, should you let your kid make the decision about public-private when they're 5? Again, I think this book tries to get to the fact of you need to make sure that your kid is really making the decision, weighing all of the facts that they should be weighing. Is it just they're making that decision based on where their best friend is, or because they had like chocolate milk in the cafeteria, or are they weighing it because they have logical reasons? If they have logical reasons, then you should let them make that decision if it's not a life and death decision. But it's tough. It's tough. Yeah, this actually came up for another person who's in my monthly meeting, the office hours meeting that I hold. She has a teenage daughter. And last year they were going through this thing where her daughter wanted to switch, I think, from a private school to a public school. And she was having all this anxiety about the choice. And she thought that her daughter was mostly making the choice because a friend was going to the public school. I think it all worked out in the end, just logistically. It didn't end up happening and it's been okay. But it's tough. And I think you can never know though, right? We never have a crystal ball. You can really feel like they're making the wrong decision, but maybe it's going to be the right decision in a way that you just never knew. There's so many parables about that kind of thing. Like you just don't know how one decision leads to another and what's going to come in the future. So I think with my niece too, she really wanted to, this was before the pandemic. She was in high school. She was miserable and she wanted to go to like independent studies, online school. And as a psychiatrist, I was like, no, I don't think that's the right choice because she's anxious and she needs to like work through this anxiety and not be avoidant. But ultimately, they made the decision with her therapist to let her do that. And she ended up doing very well. She scored like fives on 3 AP tests. She got great grades. She went to college. Like she's an excellent student now. So for her, I think it was the right choice. And even there, as a psychiatrist, like I was kind of feeling like, no, but I wasn't having a deep conversation with her about her reasons. And I think she did have logical reasons about why she wanted to do that. And she was motivated to do it and she was successful. So again, is it the thing that I would have chosen for myself or that I would want for her? No, but it worked for her. So I think you have to at some point acknowledge that your kid knows themselves better than anyone else and
Mhm.
trust that they're going to make the decisions that are best for them. But you're right, it is really hard to be able to hold on to that non-anxious, loving presence and just say, okay, like, I have to be honest, I'm worried about this choice, but if it's really what you want to do, I support you and I'm here for you. And it might be great, it might not be great, but I'll help you through. But that's really what's most helpful to them. Yeah. All right. Thank you all so much for joining. Great to see you. And hopefully we'll see you next week or next month, rather. All right. Take care. Bye.